Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Survive and Thrive During FDA Inspections. My name is Jack Garvey. I'm the Managing Partner at Compliance Architects. And with me is Teresa Gorecki, Practice Lead of Compliance Architects. First, I'd like to introduce Teresa Gorecki. Teresa is one of the firm leaders, and as I said, is our practice lead. And Teresa, could you please tell the folks a little bit about your background and experience in this area?
Thanks, Jack. It's a pleasure to join you today. Yes, I was with Johnson & Johnson for about 27 and a half years. I actually started my career with what was at that time the Ames division of Miles Laboratories, working with monoclonal antibodies in diagnostic assays, and then moved to Chiron Corporation in the early days of biotech. I left there and I joined Johnson & Johnson, and I spent a little over 27 and a half years with J&J in pretty much every aspect of quality assurance. And in fact, at J&J, that's where I met you, Jack. Right. I've led quality systems. I've worked in GCP, pre-market new product quality. I've worked in local market quality. I've been responsible for compliance. I spent years managing plants and external manufacturers. I had the majority of my career in the farm sector, but I actually spent about 10 years or so in the consumer product sector. I have an extensive amount of FDA inspection experience, Jack, as you know. I've run many pre-approval or pre-license inspections. I actually experienced some of the very first team biologics inspections and experienced those up until the point when I left J&J. I've got a lot of QSIT experience working with consumer-related devices at Class 1 and Class 2. I've had to remediate a couple of warning letters in my career. And I was a global VP, regional or unit level VP for a little over 12 years, the last 12 years of my 27 and a half year career with J&J. And I've been with you, Jack, and Compliance Architects now for about 4 years.
Yeah, and it's been a great 4 years. All right, thank you, Teresa. And folks who are watching this, Teresa is the best there is with respect to inspections. I know that from working with her at Johnson & Johnson and from the outside. And she's really, so please listen to her. She's really good at this.
Thank you.
So let me tell you a little bit about my background. I've been in FDA-regulated industry for a little more than 33 years in a variety of different roles. I started out as a plant floor engineer for a major solid oral dosage company on the packaging floor. And I still consider myself a plant floor engineer at heart. Over the years, I've worked in a variety of different roles of increasing responsibility. I always say this, I'm a chemical engineer by original training, and I'm also an attorney, a practicing attorney. Throughout my career, I've worked in operations, quality, compliance, regulatory, and have performed a bit of legal work for companies here and there. I've worked within and for numerous large, well-known companies, as well as numerous small companies. I've directly been involved with planning and leadership of about 10 FDA inspections with a variety of different companies. As a consultant, I focus on quality system development, quality system architecture, compliance and quality risk management, enforcement remediation, and 483s and warning letters. Along with my colleagues in the firm, Teresa and others, we've developed a number of significant quality and compliance consulting offerings, including our Writing for Compliance workshop training program, our CRPN quality roadmap, and most recently, our new groundbreaking Quality Pulse quality culture diagnostic. So with that introduction, let's get started. We've got a packed agenda for the next hour or maybe a little over an hour, as Teresa told me a couple times before. We're going to start with a little background of the FDA and inspections generally. I always think it's very important to provide background context, as many people don't actually get training in the basis of FDA regulation. Most of the time today, though, we're going to spend on inspection readiness and what we call being ever ready for inspections. We'll go through approaches to directing and leading the inspection management in the heat of the moment, logistics, and the incredibly important back room, or as some people like to call it, the war room. We'll spend a few slides on investigators and what to do if you get a 483, how do you respond to it, do's and don'ts, etc. Then we'll go through what you should do next, the path forward for you and your firm. We'd love to have time for questions and answers, but we hope you'll reach out to us with question and answers after you've seen this. So let's jump right in. We're going to talk first about the FDA and inspections generally, what I call FDA 101. First of all, the FDA at its core is a law enforcement agency. It's very important to understand that the FDA, as much as people talk about science and they talk about risk, FDA's authority and their whole existence flows from the law. FDA was formed and essentially gained its modern form and its modern culture in response to food, drug, devices, and other similar types of products from mistakes, fraud, and malfeasance, primarily throughout the early parts of the 20th century. If you look on the slide, there's a little image of a bottle of what's called sulfanilamide in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. During September and October of 1937, this drug was responsible for the deaths of more than 100 people in 15 states, as far east as Virginia and as far west as California. The drug and the deaths led to the passage of the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which increased FDA's authority to regulate drugs. Now, why do I bring this up? The history of the FDA is very, very important to all of us in the regulated industry to understand as we build the systems and practices the FDA inspects and as we deal with inspections. It's very important for you to remember that when FDA walks into your facility, they don't know that you're not the next bad guy. The FDA has spent the majority of its history protecting the US public in response to potential product failures, harm, and often people who are trying to make a quick buck and don't care if they harm the consumer. They go into every inspection assuming that you may be the bad guy. Now, as an industry participant, you can complain about that, and you can say that's really unfair, but that's the way it is. That's their job. So we need to understand that context as we're getting our systems ready and as we're preparing for FDA inspections, and to understand that they are really a law enforcement agency at its core. So where does FDA's authority flow from? Well, it flows primarily from the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, 21 USC Section 301. FDA is granted the ability to make rules, like the GMPs you're all familiar with, through what is called administrative law, with what is using what's called notice and comment rulemaking. So they have to follow the act in putting rules in place that apply to your operations. Also under the law, there's what's called strict liability with respect to compliance with food and drug laws for executives and for companies. Under Supreme Court cases US v. Park and US v. Dodderwhite, this principle has been confirmed. And what that means is that chief executives and other officers and management of any company are responsible for that act of the company personally. And a lot of people don't know this. Often senior leadership does not know that, particularly in smaller companies, but it's a very important principle, and it's a very unique principle of law. So in short, there's a complex relationship between the relevant legal articles, and I'm going to show that over the next couple of slides. At the top level of our government, we have the US Constitution. The Constitution enables 3 branches of government. Within those 3 branches, Health and Human Services and the FDA sits within the executive branch. It's important to understand that the authority for Health and Human Services and FDA comes from Congress, and its actions can be reviewed by the courts. So not everything that FDA does, they have authority for. That's really just a fact. It's not relevant for this discussion, but it's important to know that it's a complex legal environment that FDA is involved with. Now, FDA is a major governmental agency, and it is said that FDA regulates 25 cents of every dollar spent by US consumers. Mm-hmm. And although the FDA has other branches within its organization, this slide shows FDA's 4 main what are called centers: the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Review, the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, and the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Each of those centers operate somewhat independently and are focused on regulatory principles to ensure the safety of the regulated products they deal with. Each of the centers create advanced notice of proposed rulemaking proposals, propose rules, and often turn these into final rules, which you are likely familiar with. Also, FDA uses many guidances to help industry understand what it expects from industry, resulting from the regulations. In addition to these, we get Form 483 observations during inspections, EIRs or establishment inspection reports, untitled letters, warning letters, other legal actions, etc. And these are all important because they become inputs to what you need to do in your organization and what you need to understand for inspection readiness. You need to understand all of this information so you can develop the systems, practices, and documents that will help FDA understand that your company is in compliance. On this slide, which I use often, I'm showing what I call the FDA Enforcement Cloud. This slide shows that understanding FDA regulation as applied to your company and operation is really a complex activity. At the core of what we do, even though not many people are familiar with it in regulated industry, is the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Surrounding those are the regulations that we all know and love. However, much of what we do on an FDA on a day-to-day basis the things we think are required by law, what we call GMPs, involves what I call the enforcement cloud. It's really a large collection of interpretations, the preambles to rules, guidances, EIR comments, FDA interpreted case law, warning letter citations. What is hard is how this all mashes together and then needs to get applied to your specific operation to create what your company should be doing individually. So it's a very complicated space and very difficult to keep track of. However, understanding this and what is found in the enforcement cloud is what's necessary to really build systems and practices that will be successful during an FDA inspection. Before I turn this over to Teresa, let's talk a little bit about FDA's inspection authority. The FDA gets its authority directly from the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, Section 704A and B. Section 704A essentially authorizes FDA to enter at reasonable times any factory, warehouse, or establishment subject to its jurisdiction. Section 704B essentially provides that upon completion of those inspections, the investigator will make a report of the investigator's observations, which will show conditions or practices that may render the product injurious. And this is really the authorization for how investigators are allowed to have access to your facility and how they issue FDA 483s. And now let me turn it over to Teresa for the next few slides.
I think, Jack, before I go into inspection types, I just want to come back to those last two slides and what you talked about. I think it's extremely important for people to know that what's written in the GMPs was written in what, the 1970s? Yes. Before you and I even started working in the industry. And quite frankly, that was written very much in a quality control kind of framework, right?
Right.
And so a lot of what we think of as CGMP or current good manufacturing practice is defined in the warning letters that get issued and in the 483s and the guidance documents. And I think for a lot of organizations, it's very difficult because what's in 210, 211, or 820, or even in Part 4 or Part 11 is the bare bones basics.
Right.
Right? And what you've seen emerge, what I've seen emerge, is an awful lot of precedent, guidance, ICH, ISO documents that FDA is now accepting, which provide much more specificity and much more detail than some of the older regulations required. So as a quality leader in an organization or a member of quality or someone who is an employee in any of the regulated functions in a company, knowing what's going on in the 483s and the warning letters and in the guidance documents is an important part of keeping yourself informed and up to date with what's going on in the industry.
Thanks, Teresa.
And that's key. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up, Jack, is there's really a couple of inspection types. There are pre-approval inspection programs. So the pre-license inspection, the PMI, the things that happen before you gain approval for a product. Those programs are intended to assess readiness prior to approval. And basically they're there to check what you submitted and what you did and how do they match and how congruent are they with the requirements. Not only in the regulations, but in the guidance documents. So for example, if one is validating a process and you're going to be presenting your process validation information to FDA, you want to make sure that you've met current guidance on process validation. Frankly, if you go back to CFR 211, I think the word validation is not ever even in there. And if it is, it might be once, but it's not there.
Yeah.
Yet it's an expectation during every inspection. So pre-approval inspections are similar to GMP, but really the slant and the bias is towards the product itself. How was it developed? How is it made? How was it transferred? How was it validated? How was it characterized? What are the conditions inside the facility? Are the GMP systems inside the facility capable of supporting adequately and assuring the safety, efficacy, identity, function, if it's a device, of what you're manufacturing in that facility? The second type of inspection are really routine or statutory GMP inspections. Those are the ones, Jack, you referred back to, that every 2 years they come in, they take a look. And if you are a well-established firm that has a good reputation with FDA, they will often start with what I call an abbreviated inspection. They pick 2 quality systems, and they will begin by looking at the procedures and the outputs of those 2 quality systems. Depending on what they find, they have the opportunity to move to a more general inspection. you don't have such good inspection history, or they don't have a lot of history with you or know a lot about you, or you've had a lot of changes in your facility, they will definitely begin a routine statutory inspection with a general inspection, and they'll come in and cover most of your key quality systems. That's how most domestic inspections are run. In the international program, certainly they do more of a general type inspection. And certainly in an international inspection, they notify the company ahead of time, schedule the dates, schedule the times. Those inspections also tend to be of a more shortened duration because international travel is involved. The third type of inspection are those that I call directed, and they are for a cause. This can happen because there's a whistleblower. This can happen because there's a suspicion of fraud. This can happen because you had a recall. You could have had a class 3 recall for something as simple as an error in labeling, which really has no safety implications, no efficacy implications, and really is just an administrative thing that you needed to do because of an error in your labeling that wasn't critical. That can absolutely trigger an inspection. And certainly the more significant the type of recall, the more risk to the patient and the healthcare practitioners administering your drug or your device, the more likely that you'll have a for-cause recall, and the sooner that it will happen after that action's taken. This is dangerous territory. This is the place where it's very easy to end up with a significant 483. It's very easy to end up with a warning letter or an entitled letter, which is a letter that exists just short of a warning letter, but is telling you, you better wake up and smell the coffee. It's 6 a.m.
Right.
I think, in a directed inspection, it's really important that you understand the intent of the inspection. You understand exactly what is triggering rather the directed inspection, and that you focus the entire team at the site in all aspects surrounding that, and that you look very carefully at the kinds of issues that existed for that product and that reason for the directed inspection, and you ask yourself the hard question, does this apply to anything else at my site?
Right.
Because it's very easy to start pulling that loose thread on a sweater, and if it was major defects in your CAPA system that led to the issue that got you to the recall, they're going to pull a lot of threads on your CAPA system. Don't be surprised if they ask to see 2 years worth of CAPA logs and they go away and do their own trending and come back with 10 million questions about CAPAs that have nothing to do with the for-cause inspection, other than they share the CAPA system in common. Next slide.
Great.
So routine inspection types, we talked quickly about that. General and abbreviated, as I said, 2 to 3 quality systems and abbreviated, generally 1 week, dependent upon findings. Important when the FDA shows up at your site and issues a 482, that you sit down with them and say, is this a general, abbreviated, or other type of inspection? If it's a PAI, you'll generally know that. If it's a device, you probably received prior notification of the inspection. But the bottom line is, if it's an abbreviated inspection, your time frame is usually a week, sometimes a week and a half if they don't show up every day. And usually you will net out with minor 483 observations unless they find something major. If they begin to find things that represent major risk and a shift from your really good low risk compliance profile, which is in their system, in the profile of your company, then the inspection can be rescoped. If you end up with a general inspection, it will definitely, if it's a domestic US-based inspection, it will exceed 1 week. I've actually been in inspections that took 6 or 7 weeks in a sterile products facility. The scope will include most or all QA systems. It's also important to note, when the FDA shows up for a general inspection, they'll usually at some point early on in the inspection, some inspectors will do it later, but early on, they will start with asking about update. They'll start with an update on the profile of your company. New products that have introduced in your site, changes in your management infrastructure, major changes in your facility and your quality system. You'll see that happen in a general or abbreviated inspection, so don't get confused. That's not a quality system. Quality system is CAPA, change control, validation, utilities, maintenance, calibration, training, laboratory controls, your major quality systems in your facility. Next slide. Post-inspection enforcement actions. Inside the US, there is the 483 and the associated establishment inspection report. I tell all clients, and when I worked in a company, reading the 483 is like reading less than the Cliff's Notes about what they thought during an inspection. Obtaining the establishment inspection report, right, Jack? And reading that EIR is really a summary, a written summary of everything the investigator saw and experienced during the inspection. And frankly, they will often comment about management.
Right.
And sometimes indirectly, even talk about the culture of quality in the company. They'll certainly talk about the health and the functionality of the quality system. The next step above a 483 is the warning letter. And frankly, if you have a 483 with serious observations and they're not adequately addressed, or they are deemed to represent real concern to public health and safety, a warning letter can be issued. A warning letter is very serious. And Jack, you're an attorney. I used to always tell people, read the last paragraph or two of the warning letter. That's the last paragraph or two that says you can go to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200, right? It's not a Valentine that you want to receive.
I often tell people this is really a shot over the bow.
It's a shot over the bow. And after that, they can seize your goods. They can do injunctions. They can move you towards a consent decree where basically you need to admit you're guilty and basically surrender your organization to a consultancy that will have to come in and oversee everything you do and recertify your quality system. You know, there are application integrity policy, there's criminal investigations, and certainly we've seen with warning letters and consent decrees throughout our history, we've seen some criminal investigations.
Sure.
Outside the US, of course, there are 43s, EIRs issued. Warning letters can be issued, but one of the most powerful things FDA has that I've personally experienced often in industry is the import detention. I was working for a large global multinational firm. Sometimes we had APIs made outside the US. Sometimes our secondary source, which was a critical source, was outside the US. Sometimes we sourced products made at contract manufacturers that had capabilities we didn't have internally outside of our company. Once you have an import detention, nothing is crossing the border into the US until everything in that import detention is satisfied, which means if FDA has issued a warning letter, all of the issues in that warning letter must be cleared, which means virtually or live, FDA will need to go back and visit that site. And coordinating that ex-US, depending on the geography and the country, gets really dicey. All I can say about your ex-US facilities is don't get lulled into believing that because those inspections are of shorter duration, that it means it's going to be easy. Because if you net out in an import detention, you are really in jail for a long time. And it takes more than 3 times around that game board to get out and get back in your game.
Yeah, let me interject. Companies feel often that it's easier for them to kind of source things overseas. It's more cost effective. But the risk is FDA has very little that they need to do except pick up the phone and call US Customs and say, we have an import hold on these products. Within the US, the reason that the FDA has to go through courts is because of due process. So there are more rights inside the US. Outside the US, FDA or Customs does not have to let anything across the border. So companies need to be really careful about that.
And I've seen it happen even in the consumer products industry with OTC actives like benzoyl peroxide or salicylic acid.
Right.
I've seen the US acne market actually basically be shorted. You could go to drugstore shelves looking for benzoyl peroxide gels and creams for teenage and adult acne, and frankly, find nothing because one of the major suppliers was on import hold for a warning letter.
Right. Okay. So I'll jump in here, Teresa, on slide 13. So we talked about this a little bit. So there are both civil and criminal enforcement tools that FDA has at its disposal. We talked about import detention, injunctions, what is called disgorgement, which is essentially taking a company's profits away, consent decrees. And this is really just factual. It isn't used all that often, but criminal prosecution for things like conspiracy to defraud the FDA, false statements made to federal employees, mail-in wire fraud, RICO, and these things have happened. And it's interesting to note that the U.S. is the only company in which specific individuals, as well as the company, can be criminally prosecuted. Again, doesn't happen often, but it is something you absolutely, as a company, should be aware of.
Yep.
Okay, so now you have some background of FDA regulation, inspection types, and enforcement tools. Now comes the important stuff. What do we do with all this? How do we create a regular readiness for FDA inspections that will allow us not only to survive, but what I call thrive? So first of all, we need to understand a very important principle. When I say we, it's just not people on the floor or you as a responsible quality person for various parts of the quality system. The responsible quality and compliance executives up and down the organization need to understand that we have to comply with the law, and that compliance with the regulations and expectations of the FDA is the price of admission that we pay to make and market these high margin products. I used to tell people over my career, if you want to make pencils, make pencils. You don't have to do any of this, right? I mean, there's a lot of things you can make, but if you want to make these high margin products, it's really the price of admission. So as we discussed, FDA's basis and existence is a protection of American public health. And the vehicle that they have to ensure that you as a manufacturer, developer, or distributor is the law. So our programs, our compliance programs, our quality programs that keep us ever ready must be grounded in robust legal compliance principles. Hopefully, you won't have issues with management about their understanding or their commitment to this. But there are still many companies, surprisingly, that Teresa and I have dealt with over the years that are still not fully on board with this principle.
They think there's some standard less than the minimal requirements that they can talk FDA into, right?
Right. And it's just not the case.
No.
So over the years, working in and for many companies and making FDA enforcement my focus and livelihood, I've developed what I believe are 4 core principles to achieving successful FDA compliance within a company's quality system. The first is that FDA expects individual authority and responsibility for GXP requirements to be carried out and documented.
Yep.
What do I mean by that? So they want to understand role responsibility, which is then tied to individuals, for actions under the GXPs. Now, they believe, and I certainly, and I think Teresa can attest to this from her experience and my own personal experience, is that when you have responsibilities that are kind of group delineated, people don't generally understand that they have individual responsibility to that. So you need to create role responsibility, which ties to individual authority and responsibility for requirements. Next, they also want clear demonstration of organizational control in affected operations and process. So control is a concept. And if you look at warning letters, which we do a fair amount, the language that the FDA uses is control. And control is a concept. It's not a system. It's not the GMPs. But to successfully execute and meet the GMPs, you have to have established controls. And those controls tie to the requirements of the GMPs. FDA wants you to demonstrate your control of product builds, of manufacturing. It's really a different story than you have to convey from a process perspective. But I talk a lot about process control frameworks and how they can tell a very good story. So you want to show the agency that you're controlling the important elements of your process. You also want to make sure that all of your decision making and changes to the status quo are extensively documented and have adequate rationale. So I often talk about preparing what I call regulatory packages to document that when you're making decisions, you develop some sort of documentation set, what I call regulatory packages, that contains the details, rationales, and justifications as to why you made those decisions. In other words, what is my justification? What is my basis under both food and drug laws and under product performance review criteria? So you really need to document these under a multifaceted perspective. And then finally, proactive management of compliance initiatives and responses to agency enforcement actions is critically important. You need to show that you're proactive towards quality and compliance.
Yeah.
Frankly, I don't think that an audit program is sufficient.
Nope.
Every company has an audit program, and they're often very ineffective. There's a lot of reasons for that, but in short, you need to go beyond the audit programs and show that you really have executive leadership closely tied into making sure that your quality system and compliance programs are 100% effective for your operation, for your product. So no matter how well you manage an FDA inspection, if your systems are not ever ready, you will not meet FDA expectations and you will receive potentially significant observations. This is a core inspection readiness principle. Now you're taking a step to make sure that you understand, by listening to this program, you understand how to prepare for an FDA inspection. But as Teresa will attest, and she's really, really good at talking to investigators and leading them, you can't put lipstick on a peg, as they say. You cannot talk your way through bad systems and bad practices. And many companies think that they can do that, because they have good relationships with FDA or because they're good at managing inspections, that they can kind of talk the agency through that. But really that is a recipe for disaster. Your systems need to be what I call ever ready, and that takes a lot of hard work and it can't be done overnight. Teresa is going to talk about that a bit prior to getting into managing the inspection. So you need to be ever ready for inspections or you will not meet FDA's expectations when they show up at your door. Teresa?
So FDA's inspection aim. Their aim during an inspection is to look at the adequacy of your quality system. How well is it designed and how well does it meet the requirements in the regulations and guidelines and industry standards? And that's C in CGMP. They spend a lot of time looking at management, accountability, and responsibility, which is, for the device folks, not new since the 1990s. For the drug folks, it's been an evolution. The drug folks initially didn't have a requirement for management, quality management review and a quality plan, and there was no definition of who management with executive responsibility was. As the 90s and the device regulations emerged, and as FDA started to write guidance in the early 2000s about the quality systems approach, as some of the ICH guidances came along, management and accountability and responsibility has become a big part of the discussion, because FDA has come to recognize, I think, that messaging starts at the top down, and that if senior and executive leadership do not understand from a quality perspective what the risks are in the company and aren't ensuring appropriate resourcing and funding of addressing those gaps and involved in critical decision-making around them, that there are definitely issues within the company. There has to be, as Jack talked about, a product and a process control framework, validation. There has to be documentation of your activities. You have to have an incident management system. You've got a way to address conformances and issues, and a way to look at what the root cause was, the real root cause, not the symptoms, but what really caused it. And then what the corrective and preventative actions are, and more importantly, how to measure the actual efficacy or effectiveness of those actions. And then there, of course, is the physical plant, and there's the capability of the people. Now, when you look at that bullseye and you think about what Jack said in the slide just prior, here's the interesting thing, and the advice I give all quality senior leaders, and what I used to try to coach my plant quality directors on as I became a vice president. A compliance profile at a site or in a company evolves day by day by day, Jack. It evolves over every decision that's made every day. And what happens is, it's like the old computer printers that had, pixels, and things would print out, with little dots slowly but surely over time, and then a picture would emerge. You must, as a quality leader, whether you're at the plant level, a unit operating level, a VP, a global VP level, you must think about what you want that compliance profile for your business or your site to be. And the decisions that you make every day need to be congruent with that profile, because you can never go backwards. It doesn't matter what kind of folder and explanation and pretty PowerPoint you have in an inspection to cover an investigation that didn't go well, that maybe was something that should have been recalled, or you should have at least had a conversation about it. Maybe you should have stopped production. You should have at least had a conversation about it. It should have been escalated to senior executive management. And my favorite quote, Jack, is from an inspector that used to inspect my site when I was in Puerto Rico for 5.5 years. I was a fairly new senior level quality director. I had a large site that had many, many products as opposed to the smaller sites I'd been responsible for quality in prior. And we had a given product that had, like, I call it the curse of particulate matter in small volume parenterals. We had a lot of complaints for small volume parenterals, a lot of line rejects. We did a lot of 200 or 300% inspection, trying to still be able to release the material because, frankly, it was a chemotherapy agent for a rare disease. However, when we got into the inspection, I had put together this beautiful PowerPoint presentation, and I really tried to get that lipstick out and put it on that pig. And you know what? At one moment, the investigator looked at me and he said, "Teresa, your job is to not burn the cookies in the panaderia, in the bakery. You are inspecting out the burned cookies. Your job is to not burn the cookies to begin with. Talk to me about that." I went home that night. I didn't go to bed. I didn't sleep. I came in at 4:00 in the morning to work. And now I put together a new PowerPoint presentation, and it was basically the I surrender presentation. And at 6:00, when the engineering director and the manufacturing directors came in, I met with them and I said, "We're surrendering today. We're going to stop production of this product. We do not want a warning letter, and we've got to fix this problem. So no more avoidance, no more 200 or 300% inspection."
That's right.
Next slide.
Okay.
What comprises a quality system? How well your staff and you are organized. The defined roles and responsibilities of your staff, your decision-making models, your quality manual and your quality standards or policies, your procedures, i.e. your SOPs that tell you how to do what you're supposed to do, your electronic and paper-based records which document the outcomes of what you do, all elements of your quality system, basically everything you do in operations, procurement, quality, regulatory, storage and distribution, parts of R&D, tech transfer.
That's right.
The people who handle customer complaints, the folks who do stability testing, all of it
That's right.
is controlled by SOPs. All of it is part of your quality system. Many employees do not know how to use each element of their quality system appropriately. My favorite thing is the planned deviation.
Right.
Jack, what's a planned deviation?
It is a planned deviation.
You're planning to deviate, right? Interesting, right? So I can remember when I first started in the industry, we had these things called planned deviations, and I had a client recently who had them.
Oh, yeah.
And frankly, it's like the lipstick on a pig for something that should have been a change control, but you don't really want to make it a change
You
control.
don't want to do change control.
Right. There was a woman who wrote a bunch of great books on GMPs a number of years ago, who was a really good speaker and a really good trainer in the industry. Her name was Carol Desane. She did a really good, thorough GMP training course a number of years ago. And one of the things she said is there's two kinds of changes, those you plan on and those you don't.
Right.
Those you don't, you can call them deviations, incidents, nonconformances,
Right.
whatever you want to call them.
Right.
But the bottom line is you didn't plan on them happening, and you need to document those and investigate those and figure out how you can prevent them or control them. Then there are those you plan, and before you plan them, before you execute them, you need to understand their impact, to figure out what you need to do to qualify them. Is there submission to your regulatory submissions, et cetera, your licenses? Are there implications to worldwide submissions, for example, for a global product? But there's two kinds of changes, the ones you plan, the ones you don't. Does that mean there can be something called a planned deviation? No.
No. Right.
Next slide. So FDA compliance expectations. Here's what they expect from you when they show up. They expect strong executive management, ownership, and oversight. They expect to see evidence of that. So while they can't see your slides from a quality management review, they can expect to see the meeting minutes. They can expect to see the agendas. They expect to see people responsible for key requirements. An engineering director who acts like he's responsible for engineering. A plant manager who she or he acts like they're responsible for the plant. A quality head who has clear, decisive authority over accept, reject, quarantine, hold, etc. Not someone in the room who's constantly looking over at someone else to see if they agree, but someone who knows the requirements, has that long-term compliance profile they're trying to maintain, how those pixels evolve in mind, and they are making decisions day to day with those things in mind. They expect internally consistent decisions. They expect to see what you said earlier, Jack. This is the decision I made, but this is why.
Why?
Why in terms of compliance? Why in terms of product safety? Why in terms of efficacy? Why in terms of function? And even patient impact.
Yeah.
Because in my career, there are times I had to make some tough calls. We had products that were so medically necessary. I often went to FDA and said, look, this is the decision I'm making. I want you to know what decision I'm making and why. I want you to know that while I think there are some serious compliance gaps here, and I want to go over my CAPA plan with you, I feel this product needs to be in the market because if I interrupt therapy, I'm going to make this person drug resistant. And that's not a morally acceptable thing for me to do. They want to see that it's ingrained in company culture. And FDA today is looking more and more and more at company culture. It's one of the things why we've developed a really good quality culture tool called Quality Pulse.
Right.
They expect that the company is trying very hard to be proactive and not reactive. This is hard for sites to do. Working day to day in a plant is like working as part of a machine. You spend all of your time reacting to everything that goes on, and it's very hard to find a moment to be proactive and to get ahead of things. But more and more and more health authorities around the world are looking for and demanding that proactiveness. They're looking for actions that are tracked to stated intent. So when you've got CAPAs or other types of commitments you've made, did you do what you said you were going to do?
Right.
And when things go wrong, how do you react?
Right.
So does the quality unit head have the ability and the authority to put things on hold while the investigation's going on? Or does production simply override them and continue to distribute? These are the kinds of things they're looking to be documented in any investigation. Next slide. So you've got management sitting in the middle. You've got production and process controls. You have equipment and facility controls. The word control just keeps showing up, doesn't it, Jack?
It does.
You've got record, document, and change controls. You have control of your materials. You have control over your design. You have corrective and preventative actions. And in the middle sits management. And their objective is to ensure that management has an understanding that the right quality system is in place, that it's well designed, that there are goals and objectives associated with the ever constant need to improve the quality system, and that management understands the outputs of the day-to-day activities and the quality system to understand that the entire system and the facilities, the design process, all these processes that surround management are in a state of control.
Yeah, and let me add here, Teresa, that this is from FDA, and it's one of their few. I chose this because it was one of the few times they kind of used a graphic to design to kind of show quality system. And as you see, design controls are there, and we know that design controls technically only apply to devices. But what is inferred by this, because FDA wasn't just speaking to devices in this graphic, is that, and they don't have this in the regulation, but they do expect controls over the commercialization process for
Yes.
both biologics and pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
Now, they only have it by regulation for medical devices, but the design or development of the products have to be in control. They have to be framed in the clinical effectiveness and safety, and how does that transfer into production? So I did want to make that note that people may look at this and say this is just a device thing. but it's really their view on how they see quality systems, and we're
It's not,
managing.
and there is an ICH guidance that talks about quality by
Right.
design, which applies to drugs and biologics. And interestingly
Correct.
enough, you'll find that more and more pre-license inspections actually look at that outline in QBD and sort of tailor that pre-license inspection, pre-approval inspection to flow that in that way.
That's right. Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Inspection of one QA system always leads you to other systems. This is the spider web. One of the things that I used to do when I did on-site inspection training when I was a new plant QA director is talk about, look, we had these 25 nonconformances. They talk about training, they talk about root cause analysis, they talk about maintenance, they talk about calibration, they talk about all these other things. So product quality complaints quickly lead you to evaluation and investigation, medical safety evaluation and investigation and impact analysis, medical safety timely reporting, adequate reporting. CAPA takes you right into deviation, nonconformance, nonconformity, your CAPA system. Oh, it always leads to training. If I see another CAPA or root cause analysis from a deviation that says our corrective action is retraining, if I had a nickel for every time I saw that, I'd be a really wealthy woman with a house in Tuscany.
You would.
I would. Design control, change control, these take you to both places. And frankly, they take you right back into validation of your process, how you set your specs, how you set your limits, how you validated your testing methods. Oh, did you do IQ, OQ, and PQ on your equipment? They take you everywhere. So it's important to understand when you get into an inspection, you will not be able to control. If they come in for a general inspection and they're looking at all your quality systems, well, you know that. But if they're there for an abbreviated inspection and you think you're going to control that, you're kidding yourself.
Right.
Because you are referring to a lot of other quality system elements. And if the issues that they're finding in the two systems that they've picked don't indicate that you're executing that quality system really well, or there's issues in your fundamental design or documentation of that quality system, they're going to start pulling at all those other things. And pretty soon that sweater is a pile of yarn in front of you.
That's right.
Achieving a state of ever ready. This is a hard thing to do, right, Jack?
It is.
It's very hard. It means your CAPAs and your OOSs always have to be thoroughly investigated, documented, and closed in a timely manner. How many companies, Jack, do you see have metrics on timely closure and not the adequacy of the investigation?
Yeah, metrics are something that, companies still don't do a great job on.
No.
Still to this day.
We
Some
measure,
do, but
certainly they have to be timely, but let's talk about adequacy of what's written down and what was done.
right.
You have to have FDA enforcement commitments that are fully completed, documented, and organized.
Yeah, Teresa, let me comment on that a little bit. So one of the things that is an absolute must do is if you've had FDA inspections before, 483s or warning letters, you need to have a book, a binder.
Yes.
That documents absolutely specifically.
Yes.
This is probably the most basic of what you put in your response documents to the FDA. You set up a right procedure. You need to have that all organized such that you can go back to all of the prior enforcement observations and show exactly what was done, who did it, when it was done, and close those commitments. So
I always had a spreadsheet, and the moment we finished an inspection, even if we didn't get a 483, if we got recommendations and verbal observations, I would always say in the closeout room, okay, we start to build a binder today.
Right. Exactly.
Because we needed to start to build a binder of all those things we completed. And in fact, the way that I led inspections when I was leading them personally is when they would come in for the follow-up, I'd say, at what point do you want to see my binder?
Right. Yeah, it's critical.
And they would laugh and say, well, do you want to do that today or when do you want to do that? And I'd say, it's up to you, but I've got the binder ready. It's right over there on the table.
Right.
Right. You've got to have really a really good aggressive audit plan in place. And where you've got third parties, I cannot stress enough. I had a boss for a number of years who used to say all the time, you can delegate your responsibilities, but not your accountability. You need to have the appropriate oversight and control of third parties. You've got to have well executed audits and understand the risk there so you don't have any surprises to your business. And you certainly have to have a good independent auditing program inside your operation. Having been inside a company, I cannot tell you the number of times, corporate would come in and do an audit. And Jack, you were in corporate quality. You used to audit me. And it's interesting because
She always passed, by the way.
people would want to argue with the outcome of that audit. And I'd say, you're arguing about the wrong thing. You're
Right.
thinking about the wrong thing. Your
Right.
focus is not on the fact that Jack told us this was critical or major. Our focus needs to be on how we got here and what we're going to do about it. We're not arguing anymore about what's wrong or how it's related. Take a deep breath. If you need to go in the corner and say 5 more nasty things about it, go ahead. But once you come back from that corner, we're done.
Let's get it done.
Correct. You've got to have very well-designed document structures with SOPs, work instructions, policies, or standards. They have to be widely distributed and used. You have to have significant quality issues thoroughly investigated and detailed with well-written reports. The story needs to tell itself. If you've got to fill in the blanks and it's not really clear from what you originally wrote, it wasn't well enough written to begin with. You've got to have immaculate housekeeping and be dressed to impress. It's amazing how many establishment inspection reports I see where there was dust, dirt, spider webs, seat holes, doors that didn't seal, windows that didn't seal. It's amazing. You've got to have a well-structured, robust training and qualification program, which does not mean people simply read and understand everything, in my opinion.
My opinion, too.
You have to have adequate staffing, which is always a battle in every company. You can't have chaotic compliance. Compliance cannot be manhandled and muscled. Compliance is an outcome of good, well-designed, quality systems with people that are well-trained, that have capabilities, that know what they're supposed to do and why they're supposed to do it, and how they interact with each other across that process. You have to have clear delineations of authority, responsibility, and accountability, and you've got to have well-defined metrics. I had another boss who used to talk about watermelon metrics. We'd have these metrics where everything looked green because it was all on time.
Right.
But when you look at the audit findings from the corporate organization or other third parties that we brought in to audit us, or even some of our own self-assessments, the metrics were red, red, red. And he'd say, I feel like this is a watermelon.
Teresa, I'll give you a break. Let me take the right-hand column since you've been going for a bit. So the other part of being ever ready is your quality systems have to be ready. You can't fix them when the FDA shows up, but you also have to be kind of ready to go, because the FDA can show up and still does. They do a lot more now announcing that they're going to come inspect you, but there's still plenty of circumstances where they can show up unannounced. So you need to make sure that all employees are trained regularly on inspection management so that they understand the process, what occurs, and what their role is in the process. That you have a responsible individual in your quality organization or your operations organization, manufacturing, to be ever ready. So they should have a regular kind of status update on how ready are we for an FDA inspection. You should do regular mock inspections to ensure fast mobilization response, right? So when somebody shows up at your door, you don't want this to be the first time you've tried to figure this out. That's really a recipe for disaster. You should have predefined lists of records and documents to gather and review to make sure that they're ready to go when FDA arrives at your facility. You should have your, as Teresa talked about, the enforcement binders with your corrective action documentation. You should always have an opening presentation for an operational overview, helping FDA understand the context of your facility. Yes. I've got stories about that, about not helping the FDA investigator understand what you do, what the limits of what you do are. Right. They don't understand your operation, and you can really save a lot of kind of wasted time, and actually time FDA goes down the wrong paths, which could get you into trouble by just helping them understand the context of your organization.
You know, Jack, that's important. It's even things like nomenclature. Some companies call it filling and some people call it packaging.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Well-defined inspection plan processes. So make sure that you have a plan for everybody, a procedure, a process. Practice that. this is something that not a lot of companies have. I really encourage this, what I call compliance implementation aids. And what do I mean by that? So if you have very particular, let's say, proprietary aspects of your process or of your product, make sure that you've prepped those complexities or things that are hard to understand in advance so that you can help FDA understand why is what I'm doing makes sense from a compliance perspective. So really, they're just aids to identify and help you to explain the areas that are going to be difficult for somebody from the outside to come in and understand why what you're doing is acceptable. And finally, your subject matter experts, make sure they understand their role, what they should and should be doing, and that they're prepped and they're challenged to make sure that when when the FDA does show up, that when they walk in the door, that they're ready to go. Okay, Teresa, back to you.
So have a comprehensive mobilization plan complete, tested, and ready. Ensure the punch list of housekeeping items is ready. Make sure your back room or your war room has materials, staffing, and they have a supply list, even things like printers that have the printing capacity if FDA wants copies of things, right?
Right.
Ensure a list of ready documents that's complete and agreed upon. Ensure a list of SMEs is complete. Ensure you have procedures for responding to FDA activities. When they want to take photographs, when they want a memory stick with electronic data, when they want in a virtual or a live inspection just to access your system with you and point and say, oh, can you go there? Can you go here? Can you click here? Can you click there? What is your procedure and policy for that?
Right.
Has your legal team been consulted on that? What's your company policy for that? Can they enter controlled areas? If you have an investigator that says, I want to go into that aseptic area, you don't just let them in there.
That's right.
They've got to go through gowning qualification, which means it's going to take days because you've got to wait to see what grows on the Rodak plates, right? Have a procedure in place for handling an FDA inspection before they arrive, a company policy and a statement on audit behavior about honesty and cooperation. No one lies during an inspection.
Right.
No one lies during an inspection ever.
You take your lumps.
Understand what happens when they try to serve an affidavit.
Right.
What's your procedure for that? An affidavit is you basically testifying and witnessing something with a signature. So if FDA takes an affidavit out of her or his briefcase or shows you an affidavit on a computer, my policy and some of my plans was you literally put your fingers in your ears and you start singing and you leave the room. Everyone leaves. The quality leader says, excuse me, I cannot listen to that. If you'd like to talk to the legal attorney that covers our facility, I'm happy to set that up for you on that conference phone right there on the table. But I need to leave the room. We don't sign or listen to affidavits ever. That's our corporate policy. Make sure you've got a procedure for responding to FDA. What do you do when they want to take samples? What do you do when they want copies of records, procedures, documents? How do you track those requests? How do you know what they left with? And that they didn't walk out with any of your originals.
That's right.
You know, the best compliance managers in the facilities that I managed and the inspections I led, I always had a compliance manager who did what they called a briefcase check at the end of every day. They looked at what FDA was taking. It always was stamped copy. And he went through or she went through and knew we had retained every original and there was no confusion.
That's right. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about, and Teresa's still going to continue for a few more slides about directing and leading the inspection, something that she knows extraordinarily well.
So notice of inspection, FDA 482. They have to, by regulation, notify you they're there to inspect and they need to say what's for. Sometimes it's just for sampling. Sometimes it's for cause. Sometimes it's a general inspection. It might be abbreviated or not. It might be a pre-license inspection, whatever. But when they serve that 482, when you receive that, you need to make sure that you do not go past go and you don't collect $200 until you know exactly why they're there and what they intend to do. You need to make sure you've got a front room ready and that there's nothing in the trash bin outside of that room. You cannot be in a corporate environment where somebody tells you you can't actually have a conference room. My favorite thing when I moved out of a plant setting and into a corporate setting, when people would say to me, you can't have a conference room for an FDA inspection. And I'd say, what?
Yeah.
I can't have a conference room? No, it's scheduled for meetings today. I don't think so. I just took that room. You need to make sure that you've designated a room that will be your front room, and you need to understand where it's at logistically to your back room and where all the documents are located that you need.
That's right.
Either electronically or physically. You need to know if you've got stuff in long-term storage at Iron Mountain or some other place, offsite location, or you've got other offsite locations that support you and do ancillary activities that support what you do at your site. You need to have who you contact, how you communicate with them, how you interact with them. All of that needs to be set up before you start. You need to understand your network. You need to have, to the point you made, Jack, an opening meeting and presentation ready. You need to be prepared for a plant tour. You got to have folks who are what I call runners, which means they run stuff around between the war room and the front room. You've got to have people who are scribes who are keeping track of the entire conversation, the questions that are being asked, and the documents that are being requested and provided. You have to have real-time communication. There will be many information requests that you've got to document. You've got to be able to close out each day and close out the inspection. Do not let the investigator serve a 483, but what you do not understand the issues. But more importantly, if you want to be proactive, you understand every day what the issues were before they left. Because if there's any misunderstanding or additional information you can show them to clarify the issue, you want to do that right away the next day. And my best practice is we always kept a list of open issues and open questions. We always had a list of all the open stuff that we thought FDA might want to follow up on or they'd requested follow up on, and we made sure we ticked and tied that list out every single day during an inspection. Next slide. So notice is given. If it's ex-US, you'll know 1 or 2 months ahead of time. You will receive a Form 482. You should check their credentials and confirm if necessary. They're going to have a badge. You need to be able to mobilize fast. Inspection plans are triggered. People know. Do not have somebody go on a PA system and say the FDA's here, please. Communications plans are put into place, and everything else is secondary until FDA departs. I can remember having people in ops or people in some other part of the business say to me, why are batch releases slow? And I'd say, we've got a general inspection going on. They brought 4 inspectors. Everything in this plant is going to be slow until we're done with this.
That's right.
The future of our continuing to operate this plant is based on the outcome of this inspection.
That's right.
This is the priority. If you don't like it, let's take it to my boss. Your conduct during the inspection. You have an investigator there, not an auditor or an inspector. I always called them casually an inspector, but they are an investigator. And as I said, truthfulness. When you lie, it's a felony. Everyone tells the truth. Nobody guesses at what they think is right. And if you're not sure, you say, let me check, or get the SME or the expert to help you. And if you honestly don't know, the answer is, I honestly don't know. You always establish and build trust with the investigators. You always establish and build trust. Your job is to make their lives easy. Think about it. Right. If you're an FDA investigator, you go into how many companies a year, and every one of those companies has a different vernacular and a slightly different process flow and different titles for basically all the same thing. Your job is to help them understand in simple terms that link back to the defined terms in the regulations, what you do and how you do it. Don't play ignorant when a gap is observed. You know, I had another boss. I've had a lot of great bosses in my day. He'd say there's 3 things you can be in an inspection: sneaky, dumb, or stupid. Let me talk about what that means. Sneaky is you lie, you try to hide things. This gets you nowhere fast and in big trouble. Dumb happens every day, and people make innocent mistakes. If you made an innocent mistake, say so. I didn't realize that was included in the guidance. I didn't realize that was included in the regulation. I've kind of overread that part. Thank you for pointing that out to me. We'll take care of that ASAP. And dumb is you keep making the same stupid mistake over and over and over again.
And
The
Teresa,
two things that will get you in trouble are the first and the third. If you're always honest and transparent about an honest mistake, it will win you trust, cooperation, and collaboration with your investigators.
Teresa, let me just jump in here because I can't emphasize enough that in my experience, what you're trying to do, and as you know, a lot of companies, a lot of people still in our industry teach for their inspection readiness, they tell people to basically just keep their mouth shut. Don't say,
Yeah.
don't say a word. Don't, just keep your mouth shut. Only answer, just keep it very, narrow and very brief. And the problem with that is that you're really not building trust.
Nope.
And what I believe you need to understand, I mean, you don't kind of air all your dirty laundry, but you need to understand that the FDA is there to do a job. They have a job to protect US public health. They don't know that you're not the next bad guy, because a lot of people are. And
Yep.
all you want to do, and assuming, this kind of assumes that you are, as a company, doing the right thing, you need to help them understand that you're doing the right thing.
Yes.
You've made the right decisions. They were well intended. You're doing your best job you can. FDA understands that nobody is perfect. They understand that. What they want is transparency. They want to be able to believe that you're trying to do the right thing. They want to see that you made a good faith effort to do so. I mean, they're not going to give you a pass if you just let, large swaths of the quality system not, they haven't paid attention to it. But fundamentally, if you've done your job, help them understand what you've done, show them that you're a good actor, and build that trust. And even if you get 483s, by putting that transparency forward, they are not going to shut you down. It's the companies that try to lie, try to, play cute, as Teresa said. Those are the ones that get into trouble. Those are the ones that get into trouble. So thank you, Teresa. Okay. Keep going, please.
Opening presentation, considering a technical overview for products. I tell you, if you're in a gene therapy or a cell therapy plant, you're working with viral vectors, it's really important to have a simple, easy to understand presentation. Process flow diagrams are very, very useful. I'm not talking about PNIDs. I'm talking about high-level process flows. Key facility layout diagrams, use color, make them easy to read, keep it short. Scribes and runners back room, don't bring originals unless you only have an original. Never leave the investigator alone with an SME and anticipate where the investigator is going. So certainly if they ask for a batch production record, you've got to bring in that record. You're not going to bring in a copy of that record. So know what originals you need to bring in versus where you should be working with copies. FDA can and will request live review or a virtual inspection these days because of COVID-19. They can ask for live review of documents and records in IT tools used, and they will actually sit right next to the person who logs into the system on the screen and point and shoot and say, I want this, click there, what does that do? What does this do? Oh, can you just highlight all of those and print all those for me? I want to take them home tonight, or put them on a memory stick for me.
Yeah, you need to be prepared for that. And Teresa,
you have to be prepared.
Kind of out of scope of this, but Teresa has given some presentations on that. If you're interested, please let us know. We can talk to you about live review, but it's a very important concept to understand, because you need to be prepared if that did occur.
And it's happening more and more. We live in a virtual world. Correct. Be responsive. As Jack has said, clarify unclear, give the investigator what they want, and be complete. Don't play that I'm holding it close to the chest. There are some companies that have a policy that talk about holding it close to the chest. I'll tell you, when you do that, you can end up with 43 observations that actually are incorrect and inaccurate because you didn't give FDA all the information they need. And it's much more difficult to respond to that. And frankly, when you do, you look defensive.
Yeah.
And that's not going to help you develop a collaborative relationship.
Yes.
Inspection logistics, you've got the front room, you've got the back room or the war room, you've got document control. This has to work, Jack, right? Like a well-oiled machine.
It does. And Teresa, I will say we're in her previous roles, the company she worked with did it better than anybody. And so Teresa really knows this. It's critically important how to run these rooms and how to do inspection management. If you can't get it from this, ask for help, because this is really important, how to make this work efficiently.
Yep. Next slide. Jack?
Okay, so there's really a parallel activity flow going on during an inspection. You've got actually the inspection going on with respect to the actual investigator, the inspection host, and what's going on in the front room. And you may be giving the tour, you may be doing document review, but you've also got activities going on in the background. And that should be, you should understand that you're just kind of not waiting in the background. You are mobilizing, you're prepping other areas in advance of, let's say, if you're doing a facility tour, making sure that where the FDA hasn't gone yet, looks good, everything's all set. You're getting document requests ready that you're going to get. You want to anticipate focus areas from their questions. You want to make sure your runners and scribes are coordinated, your SMEs are prepped and staged. So you've got to keep that parallel activity flow in mind as you're kind of starting off with the FDA showing up at the door. So let's talk a little bit about investigators. First, why are they called investigators? Well, the people FDA sends to inspect your facility are fact gatherers and reporters. By statute, as we talked about, they're there to observe and they're there to make observations. It's important to understand that under the law, they are gathering evidence. Never forget that the FDA investigators can turn the information they find during inspection over to the Office of Criminal Investigation. They're gathering evidence to support a case. Now, they don't often do that, but that is what they are doing. They're also trying to create what I call negative inferences about your operation. That's kind of how they approach inspections. So they're there to protect the public, going back to first principles, and they don't know that you're not the next bad guy. So the way they do this is to try to build a story based on negative inference to essentially say this company is not doing what it should be doing. And then they can turn that over to the Office of Regulatory Affairs or to Office of Criminal Investigations. And again, that normally doesn't happen, but it certainly can. Also understand that investigators are highly inconsistent from inspection to inspection. Now, this is not because they're bad people. It's because, like people, we're all very different from person to person. And so, you can't expect that every FDA investigator is like a robot, right? Some investigators are thorough and go into details. Some are more cursory. And it's very dangerous for companies to take any comfort from a single FDA inspection. And I've seen a lot of companies make the mistake of going through an inspection and saying, oh, we're fine. We didn't get a 483.
Yeah.
And then the next time an investigator comes in, a completely different individual with a completely different approach, well, then the company gets into real trouble. So you really always want to kind of be prepared for the worst case scenario with respect to an investigator. You definitely don't want to underestimate them. These are smart people. They are people that are trained to find people that are lying to them, that are preparing to cheat the American public or possibly hurt the American public.
Yeah.
Never, ever underestimate an FDA investigator.
They go to a certain level of FDA training.
Absolutely. So fundamentally, investigators are trained to look for problems. Now, there has been lots of changes in FDA's messaging about inspections. They'll talk about risk-based inspections and risk-based activities, but at their core, FDA investigators still, to this day, look for problems. And I'll talk about this in a second, that there are different approaches now with the quality system approach, but most of the times, FDA investigators still go back to the historical training, which is a bottoms-up approach to problems. And then they use these negative examples of failure to create a negative inference about your overall level of operational control. Also, FDA reviews what we've already touched on, what is called live data review, and that Teresa has a lot of experience in. And this is where they ask for direct access to your systems to review CAPAs, deviations, et cetera. Continue to talk a little bit about tactics. There are three different, as we talked about, three different types of inspections, and the tactics are a little different for each. The statutory GMP inspection is generally a combination approach. They take a little bit of the top-down quality systems review, but they generally still do a bottoms-up approach, in my experience, in that they're looking for problems, because that's the best way they can try to identify whether a company creates a risk for the American public. In directed inspections, they may look at a particular problem area on some complaint, a whistleblower, and then with pre-approvals, they're certainly looking at the overall readiness of the company, their general systems, but they're absolutely looking for the product development robustness. Do you understand manufacturability? Do you understand what's critical to control? Do you understand how to mitigate differences in manufacturing through equipment control, through raw material control, through API control? So all three different types of inspections have a little different conduct and approach. Inspection management, daily conduct in the inspection. The investigator won't necessarily give an agenda. They may or may not do a wrap up daily. You've got to have a procedure to prevent picture taking. And again, there are different, that's more involved than just saying you have a procedure. There are legal questions about legal training, about picture taking. So if you have any concerns, talk to your counsel. Samples should get logged. Regarding the closeout, you should have senior management present. At a minimum, you should have the senior site representative. If you're a small company, you should have the company president. You should at least have the general manager of the site. The Form 43 goes to the most senior executive, and the response is crucial that it be done within 15 days. Here are some classic FDA observations that may flow from an FDA inspection: not having procedures where necessary, not following procedures that were in place, inadequate documentation of an activity, failure to execute or document, inadequate CAPA or investigations, or nonconformances or deviations, complaints, nonconforming product not identified or adequately dealt with, poor process validation or poor process validation program, ineffective quality audit, inadequate management oversight, inadequate design control, design transfer. I mean, these are classics. These are just a few, but these are some of those. So now I'm going to turn it back to Teresa for a few slides on response do's and don'ts.
Do respond. Unless you're an expert in FDA 43 responses, get an expert to help you.
Right.
I cannot say enough about times that I've worked with clients or organizations or been in organizations where people wrote responses that were impossible to keep. Either the timeframes were impossible to keep, what they were committing to was not possible to do. Respond within 15 business days, regardless of whether you're completely ready or to respond or not. So if it means that you cannot respond completely within 15 days, it's important you tell them you can't and why. You give them what you can give them, and that you set a new time frame that you agree with them on, and you meet that commitment. As of 2009, FDA enacted a new policy that they will issue automatic warning letters to companies that fail to respond to FDA 43s within 15 days. It's a significant policy change.
Not new anymore. As I look at that, we should probably take new off there. But
yeah, but one that is indicative of the increased enforcement posture of the FDA. And strike a conciliatory and a contrite tone in your communication. Be sensitive to admissions of noncompliance, but do not be defensive. If they have a legitimate concern, you have to respect that concern, understand it, and try to find a way to manage through that. Offer a complete and thorough, compelling remediation plan that addresses the observation, but the root causes of the deficiency. I cannot tell you the number of times I've seen organizations get warning letters because they said in their response, I'm going to write a CAPA to fix that. Well, yeah, but if the last 3 years of complaint investigations were inadequate for something for a combination product that suggests you had chronic dosing errors, you need to address that. You can't just write a CAPA to fix it. At a minimum, you should have counsel that you notify within your company or outside. And you want to make sure all communications with FDA are reviewed by counsel. My regulatory compliance attorneys in the organizations that I've worked in have been some of my best buddies.
Yeah.
Establish trust with the FDA. If they believe they can trust you, they're going to be more open to your approach, your plans, and your efforts. If they feel they cannot trust you, you're very defensive and you're hostile, you will definitely be targeted for further enforcement action, and your life gets very difficult, and you'll never have a profile that says, I can do abbreviated inspections, because they don't feel they can trust you. Don't complain about the FDA picking on you. They're not. As Jack has said over and over again, their charge is to protect public health and safety. And frankly, they don't care whether your business has made money or not. We actually have had some clients that we've helped them make decisions about sometimes not being in certain businesses,
Right.
because to do the things they needed to do, they couldn't actually really afford to do them.
Right.
It didn't make sense from a business perspective. Folks from the FDA are not bad people. They're doing a valuable job. Don't mistake their mission or think you can persuade them that you're being singled out or targeted unfairly. It won't work. And it serves to decrease cooperation and in any level of positive forward-moving interaction.
Yeah, and
Getting
we've had
defensive with these folks and acting like you're being personally accused serves no purpose.
Yeah, we've had consulting clients, smaller firms that have felt that they were being singled out, and it will not serve you well.
Yeah. Don't be late with your response. It doesn't matter how busy you are. You have to get that done. When I used to have an FDA response that had to go in, even as a VP, when people in my organization were working on it, I cleared my calendar until it was in.
Right.
I made sure if I committed to follow up with them on certain things going forward and submit information to them going forward, I had a few days before that, and that day cleared on my calendar. So I made sure those things went in.
That's right.
So when your responses need to be in, when you've made promises, keep your commitments. Don't spend a lot of time challenging the FDA's interpretation of the law, their regulations, unless you've got counsel.
Yeah.
I've successfully done that in a couple of cases, but I had counsel support. It was well researched. And in the end, as I very politely presented additional information from the regulations to the inspector, they actually acknowledged that they hadn't thought about it that way. They would speak to their supervisor that evening, and in fact came back the next day and said, you were right or you were wrong, let's go forward. But if you're going to do that, be very, very careful.
That's
In
correct.
most cases, it's not advisable to do it. But if you do have a circumstance where somebody is saying, I need to see the results of all your internal audit responses or all your internal audits, you actually have the right under the regulations not to show them that. You need to show them evidence of the program that you've done them. You can show them things like agendas and schedules and other information, but by regulation, you don't have to show them those results. So it's really important that you know what the regulations say. When you're in doubt, you check with folks in the back room that are there to support you. When it's appropriate to challenge, do it very carefully. Don't assume you're out of the woods because you didn't hear back on your response. In fact, if you don't hear back in your response, assume you're in trouble. You should be undergoing a compliance assessment to ensure that when they come back in your door, that you present the best possible face for your organization possible.
Yeah.
You need to assume, I used to say to the guys in sales when I was at J&J, we have a lot more in common than you sometimes think. You always tell sales reps, you're only as good as your next sale.
Right.
You're only as good as your next inspection, not the one you just had.
Interesting. That's a great statement.
Right?
Okay, so let's talk about what you as an organization should be thinking about going forward. Let me make sure I didn't miss a slide here.
Nope.
So recommendations. So you should really, as a company, after kind of going through this, assess your FDA compliance risk profile, and to do that on a regular basis. And really, this is where third-party assistance with firms like ours are really helpful. Do your systems practices meet current FDA requirements and expectations? Have you clearly delineated your individual authority and responsibility for all of your GXP requirements? Has your documentation of decision-making and changes status quo, have they been done, and have they been done well? Can you demonstrate your organizational control of your operations and processes? And have you proactively managed your compliance initiatives and responses to agency enforcement actions? And assess your FDA inspection readiness. Are you ever ready for an inspection? So, can you look at yourself and say, if we had an FDA investigator walk in tomorrow and you look at what you just went through, how would we perform? Are you prepared to mobilize for an inspection today or tomorrow? Does everyone understand the process and know their roles? And have you practiced your inspection conduct? And finally, we'd recommend, this is what we do for a living. Teresa and I have done this a long time. We love working with firms, and seek expert help. And you can be ready for an FDA inspection, and you can get through that and really shine and thrive and survive. But you need to pick up the phone and call somebody like Teresa and myself, and we'd love to help you. So with that, if you need any more information, want to expand on any of the concepts, or if you want to get any in-person training for your team, send Teresa I a note, or you can call us at our main number. We'd love to talk to you. Again, thank you for your time. We hope you enjoyed this. We'd love to hear a note from you as far as how good you think the training was. And it's been our pleasure to deliver it to you. So thank you.
Thank you.